Dan Kraker is a reporter based in Duluth for Minnesota Public Radio. He often reports on the Boundary Waters and Lake Superior region here in northeastern Minnesota. Kraker recently received 2 very prestigious journalism awards for his December 2023 piece that's titled "When Conditions Align, Skaters Seek Out Wild Ice." The awards are a National Headliner Award for Best in Show. That's a very, very prestigious and one of the oldest journalism awards in the country. This is the 90th annual National Headliner Awards this year. And Dan also recently won a regional Edward R. Murrow Award in the features reporting category for that story. So Dan, let's start with congratulations on those achievements.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. It sounds fancier than it is when you say it that way, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I mean, these awards are very, very hard to come by. Murrow Awards. I mean, I've been nominated for some of those. I think it's very difficult to get even that regional one. So like that alone is a big deal, the Murrow Award, and then the National Headliner Award. I mean, you're like in the same category by not comparison, but to put it in context, is like ESPN won in the TV category, and the Miami Herald is in there, and Reuters. Like, this is like very, very not just sort of a regional Minnesota, Wisconsin type thing. Like, it's a big deal, Dan. I know you're going to try to downplay it, but I'm not letting you off.
All right, I'll let you say that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and it's such a great piece when it came out. I mean, this winter with the lack of snow, it seemed like, okay, we've got this window again to have this wild ice, which is, for people who aren't familiar, basically when the lakes and around the Boundary Waters freeze and there's no snow that's come down yet, it's often can be a really smooth surface. So people put on skates like you would see at a pond in the metro or something, or, in a town, and they can just go, and you can even Portage and so forth. So this phenomenon lasted for a long time over this past winter, 23, 24. But you were there early, as I said, in December. You went out with some Cook County residents. Just take us up to how you found out about it, how you got the invitation or made this happen.
Yeah. So, like you said, I mean, it's this ephemeral thing, right? When it happens, the conditions don't always align. So when it does, people who are into this, they take advantage of it, and they kind of drop everything to do this skating when it's out there. So I knew, early in the winter, we had no idea that it was going to become this winter with no snow for months. So I'm like, okay, I want to do this story soon. I want to get out with these folks while the conditions are there. So I actually started with Kirsty Vick, who I know from lots of different stories, who works with tourism up there. And so she hooked me up with a couple other people, and Kirsty's a big skater too. And I knew she was a skater, and she had actually flagged me. She said, "Hey, the conditions are pretty good." So I just went up there. It's funny, Joe, especially with all these awards, is the day I went up there, I actually had, like, the day before, I had some other story planned that fell through. And so all of a sudden I had this day, and I'm like, well, maybe I should try to do this wild ice story because I know the conditions are good. So, like, spur of the moment, I remember talking to John Oberholzer. We met at his house. I called him like the night before. I'm like, hey, can I come up? He's like, sure. So it was really a spur of the moment thing. And I drove up there in the morning, and we spent a few hours on the lake, and they kind of gave me the lay of the land, and it was a pretty magical morning.
Yeah, and you actually put skates on yourself, right? And we're on the ice.
I did, and I am not a good skater. I'll say that straight up. I'm a pretty good cross country skier, but I am not good on skates. I'm tall, and I just feel wobbly. And I was carrying my microphone, and I had my big recorder like around my neck, so I felt really unstable. But yeah, I strapped on that. John Oberholzer lent me a pair of those Nordic blades. These blades that kind of fold up, and they attach actually to ski boots. They're really cool. They're these long blades, and they're designed for this long, like, cross-country skating. So yeah, I strapped them on and tried it out a little bit, but mainly I talked to these guys, watched what they did. I actually, to get some of the sound I got for the piece, I actually gave my phone with just a voice memos app recording, and gave it to one of the skaters so they could skate, just to do a long skate, so they could just get that sound of the blades going across the ice. But yeah, it was a cool day.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful piece of audio production, and within that context, like you mentioned the Facebook group that formed. There's this
Yeah.
Cook County Skater Network group, and then a lot of that buzz was already happening even before your story came out of people saying, "Man, I want in on that." You know, they see it on Instagram or social media, and people were kind of flocking up to the Boundary Waters area. There were some people in our episode 2 of the Paddle and Portage podcast. We talked with 2 Cook County people who went through the ice this winter. Our auditor went through, longtime auditor Brady Powers, and another local resident in Cook County as well. And so, there was this element of danger, and you talk about that in your piece. Like, you've got the safety component built in. It's a big section of your story, and Oberholzer even says, like, that's a part of this. That's like why, that's a big part of why I do it. At least a part of it is that risk and danger element. Tell us about if you heard anything from people like, dude, why are you promoting this, or anything like that.
I didn't hear anything, but that was something I was very conscious of when I was putting the story together. Because, like you said, we're in this Instagram era now where people see this stuff and they're like, I want to do that. And so I'm very conscious that I don't want inexperienced people to come up and do this and put themselves in a position where they could get hurt or die. But at the same time, I want to highlight this really cool activity that can be, very safe if you're smart about it. So that's why in the story, I made a conscious decision to really talk about safety a lot. And so I actually started the piece. I'm like, before we even go, John takes out his axe and he chops through, to see how thick it is, and talk about what the DNR advises with 4 inches. People do skate on less than 4 inches, but I don't think I even went there in the story, just to put that out there. Later in the story, Kirsty actually gets out her drill. I mean, the other thing is it just gave that great sound for the story. I had the axe and the ice echoing. I had the drill going through to the water. So it really added a lot just from an audio perspective to the story. But yeah, I thought a lot about that actually, because I was very conscious of not wanting to make it seem like this is something that anybody can do, because, this better than anybody. People, inexperienced people come up there a lot, and sometimes that's okay, but sometimes it's not.
Right. Yeah, I think that the fact you made that a point of emphasis is really added a lot to the story, that it wasn't just let's just talk about how wild and free and kind of adventurous this is, Totally. Well, you do a fair amount of reporting, as I said, on the BWCA, specifically things like environmental issues, from twin metals and proposed copper nickel mines to just, stories of people's experiences in the Boundary Waters and Lake Superior as well. How much of that is in your personal life, though? Like, you get out to the BWCA, you go paddling and do that whole scene?
I do. I not as often as I'm envious of you living right in the backyard. I mean, I'm close here in Duluth, but I get up usually, for sure we do. I have 3 daughters, and we have been doing at least 1 trip a year ever since we moved to this area in 2011. So at least 1 trip a year, hopefully a shorter trip as well. So yeah, but I actually, when I was younger, I worked at a camp, boys kind of outdoor camp on Rainy Lake outside of International Falls. So that's where and so we would take long canoe trips into Canada, actually. And so that's where I first got into sort of canoe tripping. And I'm a big backpacker and lived in the Southwest. And so I'm an outdoorsy guy, and the Boundary Waters is a pretty special place. It's as you know, it's a magical place, and it is my favorite. I've camped a lot in the mountains and in the desert, but the Boundary Waters campsites are my favorite place to camp. I mean, just the rock and the water, and I just love my family. We're not big anglers. We love to swim. We work hard. We paddle. We're fast paddlers. We're fast portagers, and we're the people who, we're kind of campsite snobs, and we want to find the perfect campsite with the sweet swimming, and so we can hang out and lounge. And that's my perfect day, is like work hard in the morning and get some miles in, and then sit back in the sun and then a nice big rock and jumping in with my kids. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
Right on. Cool. And not to give away your favorite places, but do you have some lakes or a place that you really like to go to, or a campsite, even if you want to share it?
You know, speaking of swimming, have you been to the cliff jumping spot on Wasini?
No,
Yeah, so Wasini Lake, which is down, it's south of like the so you go up Moose, you go over on Knife, and then kind of go south, and it's a little tiny lake. You wouldn't think it, but you paddle past, and it's kind of a tough place to pull your canoes out, but there's just like different levels of cliff jumping. And there was one day, the one day we've only stayed there once, but the day we did, we left. What lake was it? It was gosh, I can't remember. A nice lake where we camped the morning before, the night before. We had maybe been on the water literally a half hour, 45 minutes. We passed by this site. I had heard about it. We checked it out. It was like 9 a.m. And I'm like, we have to stay here. And my daughter, we knew if we stayed, it was going to make for long days, the last couple of days of the trip. But so we spent like literally all day swimming and jumping, and it was pretty epic.
Yeah, nice. And that camp you mentioned on Rainy Lake, is that the one like on the way to Mallard Island there, where Ernest Overhol's place? Yeah, that place is great.
It's a pretty amazing place. I mean, there are these. It's this. I mean, they've been there 100 years, and they're based out of Cincinnati. I went to college in Ohio, and their headquarters are actually in Cincinnati, and that's how I got hooked up with it. I never heard about it growing up in the Twin Cities. And I camped as a kid, but like I never came up to the Boundary Waters at all and did I hadn't been exposed to like backpacking or like, canoe tripping and camping until I was in college. Then when I worked at that camp, and that's when I got the bug. But yeah, it's a special place, and it's kind of like Widgie in those camps where it culminates with the oldest kids doing month-long trips up in the Arctic. So they do pretty extensive tripping. And so I was able to do trips like on the English River in Ontario, the Allan Water River in Ontario, these long, like kind of 10-day canoe trips with a bunch of 11, 12, and 13-year-old boys, which, has its own adventure to it.
Right. Yeah. Wow. What a cool introduction to have to this place. And it's clearly made an impact on your life, as I've heard from, so many people, like when they get that early introduction to just to have a taste of the Boundary Waters, like some of our good paddling buddies, they just keep coming back,
It's a remarkable place. And I really try to, with my stories, I mean, I have a lot of freedom with my job at MPR, and I can, I have to cover the news obviously, but I've been able to sort of carve out my own beat, and a lot. I mean, I think so much of this region now is, especially as Duluth has really shifted towards, really sort of promoting itself as an outdoor kind of adventure town. I mean, it has become part of the economy here. It's become part of the larger story of the region, and I think that that sense of place just kind of resonates with people around the state. So I really look to, even this Wild Ice story, I look for stories that really highlight what a special place this is, because I think people around the state do love Duluth. They love the North Shore. They love the Boundary Waters. Even people who don't come here that often, what they know about it, they just love it. They want to learn more about it. They want to hear stories to kind of celebrate that. So I look to do those kind of stories whenever I can in my work.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, that's awesome to hear, and I'm assuming that means we'll see you up this way, before too long. And
yeah,
right on. Yeah, and the awards. We'll add some links to the awards and definitely to your piece called "When Conditions Align, Skaters Seek Out Wild Ice." Recently won 2 very prestigious journalism awards. Some national recognition for that, reporting for Minnesota Public Radio. We're talking with Dan Kraker. He is the Duluth-based reporter for MPR. Dan, always a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, good to talk to you, Joe.